This video on FPL TV is very proudly sponsored by OneFootball. With a rating of 4.8 out of 5 from now over 100,000 reviews on the App Store, OneFootball truly is the biggest and best app for football news, scores and stats from hundreds of leagues all over the world. As for FPL, you can choose to follow every team in the Premier League on OneFootball and then get live updates from all the goals and assists every game week. Download it now completely free using the link in the description box below. Hey guys, and welcome back to FPL TV. Before looking at my team selection and potential transfers for Game Week 10, let's see how the side performed in the previous game week. There was a slight change of plan than what was suggested in my last team selection video, and that was down to Lukaku getting injured in the Champions League in midweek, just minutes after uploading that video. The initial plan was to move Ben Rama onto Brentford's Mbeumo last week, but with that Lukaku injury, in came his teammate Ivan Toney instead, a player that I wanted for the long term anyway, so it was the perfect excuse to bring him in. Toney may not have delivered against Leicester, but he now faces Burnley, Norwich and Newcastle in consecutive games, 3 of the division's worst defences, so hopefully he can pick up some returns there. With obviously a lot of cash saved in that move, I was then able to upgrade Ben Rama to Son Heung-min with a second free transfer. Frustratingly and yet inevitably, both of my new signings blanked in Game Week 9, but each were moves made with the longer term in mind, and providing they can avoid injury, I can see both of them sticking around in my squad for a while now. The defensive assets last week were a real mixed bag of emotions, with Sarr in goal agonisingly losing his clean sheet and 2 bonus points to a 95th minute penalty. Really frustrating considering he was my biggest differential last week. Sarr has now blanked in all 3 games since wildcarding him in, and that's been a detrimental decision, with the popular Sanchez at Brighton continuing to outscore him, even against Man City. On the wildcard 3 game weeks ago, I also brought in the double up of Cancelo and Diaz off the back of 5 consecutive clean sheets. And in those 3 game weeks, they've only managed a pitiful 10 points between them. Crazy considering they racked up a whopping 50 points between them in the 3 game weeks prior to buying them. They too conceded late on in Game Week 9, also to a penalty, which looked as well to have an offside in the build-up. So I'm always one to take responsibility for bad decisions in FPL, but with these 3 players last week, I really feel hard done by. The positives from defence though, all came from that Chelsea fixture at home to Norwich. Rudiger managed a clean sheet and an assist in that one, so a nice 9-pointer there to soften the blow of both Reece James and Chilwell going big. And with Christensen missing out, that ended up being an ideal outcome for me, because in came Livramento automatically from that first spot on my bench. I mentioned in my last video that Livramento was the perfect backup for me last week, and I was delighted to see him bag himself a goal. What a top young talent he's been so far this season. When Chelsea put 7 goals past Norwich, my first reaction was actually frustration, that Lukaku probably would have scored a hatful in this fixture had he not got injured, and I was all but set to captain him for that one. However, my mentality very quickly changed after Mo Salah tore apart United in the final game of the weekend, with an outstanding 24-pointer as my captain. I've spoken a lot about some bad luck over the last few game weeks, but in this case I have to admit I got very fortunate here, because had Lukaku not got injured, I would therefore not have captained Mo Salah, and with a monster score like this, that really could have seen me topple down the rankings. The Egyptian king single-handedly salvaged what was another average game week overall, and although his mega haul didn't affect my ranking too much, it was certainly a relief at least to have the armband on him. Elsewhere, as expected, Antonio did add to his superb record against Tottenham, one of the week's most predictable goal scorers in my opinion, and Jimenez continued to do what he always seems to do well, never often racking up explosive FPL scores, but ticking along nicely with a goal or assist. So for Game Week 9, thanks to the heroics of Mo Salah, my team scored 89 points, and with that, my first green arrow in 5 game weeks. Considering the big score, it wasn't that great of a rise in ranking, moving from 420k to 350, but it's something, and overall it's a solid game week no doubt. Of course it could have been much better, with both Man City and Wolves so close to clean sheets, and those points would have had a much bigger impact than Mo Salah's did. Let's move on to Game Week 10 now and see how the side currently lines up, as well as a few potential transfer plans. Also, if you enjoy the content here at FPL TV, then be sure as always to leave a like and most importantly get subscribed. You can also hit that notification bell so you always know when a new video goes live. Heading into Game Week 10, injury concerns aside, it's another game week where I'm very content with how my squad is shaping up. Of course, there's a few players I'm interested to bring in potentially, but I wouldn't say there's any real pressing issues here, and it may be a chance to save the free transfer. That will of course depend on the fitness updates of Christensen and Rafinha though, particularly Rafinha who faces Norwich this week, and I certainly want him fit for that one. With lots of teams having played in the League Cup in midweek, we've already been gifted some bonus press conferences. And in those, Marcelo Bielsa's already given us a positive update with regards to Rafinha, suggesting he should be fit for the weekend. But let's see what he has to say towards the end of the week. As for Christensen, well, Tuchel has said it's some kind of dental problem, so a bit of a strange one, but not something you'd imagine would keep him out for too long. For now, Saka comes into my starting 11 for Christensen as we wait for further information, but with Christensen realistically only having a ceiling of 6 points at best anyway, it might be worth fielding Saka regardless and hoping he returns to form. Looking at my starting 11 this week, it's probably only Saka that I am really starting to lose patience with, and he's another player that's blanked in all 3 games since wildcarding him in. He did come extremely close to scoring last game week though, and does have home fixtures against Watford and Newcastle in the next 4, so he could be worth holding on to for those. If I am to use my free transfer this week, then transferring out Saka for either Foden or Mason Mount is certainly in consideration. As for the rest of the squad, I'm hoping for some decent returns in Game Week 10, with Antonio, Son, Tony and Rafinha all facing very shaky defences. I'm also hoping this is finally the game week that both Diaz and Cancelo get me that much sought after double clean sheet at home to Palace, though I've actually been very impressed with the Eagles so far this season. For the captaincy this week, I don't think it'll come as much of a surprise to anyone to say that for me, it's almost certainly going to be locked to Mo Salah once again. In Game Week 9, over 3 million managers captained the Egyptian king, a huge amount, so one can only imagine how many will hand him the armband this time out following that monstrous 24-pointer at Old Trafford, with his ownership now approaching 70%. Now don't get me wrong, I don't want to always hand the player the captaincy simply down to ownership, but I think Game Week 9 showed just how damaging it can be to your season if you are on the wrong end of going against the most popular asset, and those that didn't captain Mo Salah last week can certainly vouch for that. Granted, if you are looking to chase the upside, then knowing just how heavily captained Mo Salah will be once again this week does open the door to punt on an alternative, and obviously that can reap huge rewards when timed correctly. But for me personally, this week just doesn't feel like the right time to do so, to bet against Mo who is simply in absolute top form at the moment. As mentioned, I'm fairly happy with how my squad shapes up, and it does look like a good chance to roll the free transfer. However, with a cool 3 million still in the bank, if I were to make a move before the deadline, then here's a few potential candidates to come in. In my opinion, perhaps the biggest miss in my squad right now is Alexander-Arnold, and as mentioned in my last video, he's a player I'm looking to bring back into the fold when the time is right. I could simply get it done this week, it's just the timing that isn't ideal, with Chelsea facing Newcastle and then Burnley in the next 2, and Man City at home to Palace this week. Trent will certainly be coming back into my squad soon, it's just a case of whether I do it now or wait for a future game week. The alternative in defence is to make a sideways move this week, moving on Christensen to teammate Ben Chilwell, with goals in each of his last 3 Premier League games. It's difficult to see that kind of consistency in front of goal continuing, but there's no doubting he offers a much bigger upside than Christensen does, especially in these next 2 games against Newcastle and Burnley. Signing either of these 2 defenders this week would of course mean moving Saka back to first spot on my bench. In terms of Saka replacements, then it's Phil Foden who's my most preferred alternative. He's looked excellent in recent weeks, and although I thought he was a bit fortunate to come away with 18 points in Game Week 9, his underlying numbers have looked very impressive. In the last 4 game weeks, only Antonio and Mo Salah have had more shots inside the box than Foden, who also boasts the 2nd highest expected goals in that time. My only concern with buying Foden this week is that it would then leave me with just 1.2 million in the bank, which isn't enough to bring Trent Alexander-Arnold back into the squad at a later date. For this reason, opting for Mason Mount instead of Foden would still leave that door open for Alexander-Arnold, but that move does seem a bit knee-jerk after just 1 good performance against Norwich. So that's all my thoughts about my team and transfers heading into Game Week 10. And as always, I'll post my final team and transfer moves over on Twitter shortly before the Game Week deadline. Good luck to you all for the upcoming game week, FPL responsibly, and I'll catch you all in the next video.